What's up everyone and welcome back to Reload Reacts. My name is Trey and today we are going to look through r/NuclearRevenge, the subreddit for those who try to take their revenge to the most extreme of lengths. This post is by Raven's Arts. Nuclear, feline, revenge. Crazy entitled neighbor tries to bleach my sister's cat. Cat gets revenge. I count this as a nuclear revenge story, but not in the traditional sense. This happened many years ago. My older sister had this awful bee neighbor who had a serious hard-on for Sis's seal point Siamese cat. I'll call neighbor CN for crazy neighbor. Sister is Sis, me is self-explanatory. CM was a black-haired, plump 40-something divorcee who annoyed everyone in the neighborhood. She had zero understanding of boundaries and liked to come over to people's homes, barge in and look, snoop around, opening drawers and cabinets and touching their stuff. Once she even went into someone's fridge and grabbed herself a ginger ale, then got mad when the homeowner took it back. If you left your door, front or back, unlocked for more than 10 minutes, chances were she'd just come right in. She stole yard decorations from other people's yards and had been caught on more than one occasion pocketing something she'd snagged off a mantle or a table of a house she'd invaded, and she would always throw a tantrum when she got busted. Cops have been called on her many times, but she was good at being pathetic, so most people didn't press charges. Unfortunately, this made her bolder. Basically, she was the entitled bee of the neighborhood. Sis was, unfortunately, one of her favourite victims. She'd come over without calling, barge her way in and demand, to see Sis's cat, telling Sis how beautiful he was and how much she just wanted a cat just like him. Sis, being a rather non-confrontational person, would let her see the cat, who didn't like the woman, then make her leave. Sia never wanted to leave and had to basically be pushed out the door. Oh, and she despised me because I wouldn't let her in when I answered the door, nor would I tolerate her BS in any way if she got past my sister. CM was so obsessed with the cat and offered to buy him many times, but Sis loved that cat. He'd been the runt of the litter and rejected by his mum. My sister had taken him and bottle fed him, mothered him and saved his life. He wasn't a pet, he was her child. So Sis of course always said no. This royally peed off CN. One day the cat got out, he wasn't an outdoor cat, so Sis and I immediately started looking for him. We were checking the bushes and behind the flower pots in her backyard when we heard a very distinctive yowl, one of pure rage, followed by a very human shriek of pain coming from CN's house. Suddenly, the doggy door on CN's back door slams open and out runs my sister's cat. His tail and one rear paw covered in what smelt like hair bleach. I'm allergic to bleach and immediately recognized the smell as he passed me, dashing past us and into Sis's house. Next thing you know, CN's back door slams open and out she comes cursing up a blue streak. Ragged claw marks adorned her left cheek and one of her hands had a deep bite wound that had completely saturated one of the gloves, the kind one gets with any hair coloring kit she was wearing and running down her hand and arm. Turns out when the cat had gotten out, CN had grabbed him, took him inside, then tried to use hair bleach to bleach the brown out of his tail and paws in order to change his appearance so she could keep him. Unfortunately for her, she didn't know S about Siamese cats and just how violent they can be. They were originally temple guardians for a reason, lol. The moment CN put that bleach on that cat's tail, he went absolutely berserk, letting out that yowl of rage we'd heard, clawing up CN's face and sinking his fangs deep into her hand. She pushed herself between the bushes, the ones that look like tall green paint brush heads. Sis used to separate the property line and began yelling. No, not yelling, shrieking. She shrieked that Sis's cat had wandered into her kitchen while she was cooking, and when she tried to pick him up, he attacked her for no reason. Clearly, this was total BS. CN then proceeded to call Sis the N-word several times, she's half black, and me a effing half-breed wetback S, I'm half Hispanic. We have different dads. She screamed that my sis was stupid for keeping such a dangerous animal and that my sis would be paying all her medical bills. She then got right in my sister's face, pushed my sister hard in the chest with her uninjured hand, saying she was calling animal control and intended to have that thing put down. Cian opened her mouth to say shriek some more, but my sis, after hearing that last statement without one word of warning, hauled off and decked her. She landed on her butt in the grass, now clutching her left eye. Sis then loudly suggested Cian go screw herself with a hot curling iron, then ran inside to find her poor cat while I called the cops. The whole thing from start to end lasted only about 5 minutes. Sis found him hiding in the laundry room and quickly cleaned him off in the sink. Meanwhile, Cian is still on her A in our backyard, howling like a banshee until the cops arrived. I told them what had happened, and they later talked to my sister after she tended to her cat, who gave them the same story I did, even admitted to hitting Cian in self-defense of course. It didn't hurt her case that Cian had left a bloody handprint on my sister's shirt when she shoved her. Cian of course told them something completely different. Her story was that she was about to bleach her hair when my sister's cat came in and attacked her. She also said that both Sis and I attacked her too. I apparently kicked her in the stomach after Sis punched her, but the cops found no evidence of bruising, and the scratches on her face kind of masked her swelling eye. I think cops also turned a blind eye, pun intended, to it, considering the circumstances, but since there was a clear blood trail leading into Cian's open back door, cops felt they had probable cause to go in. I think if Cian had been paying more attention, she'd have refused them entry. The blood trail led to a sink in the first floor bathroom. Blood, cat fur, a bleach applicator, and the box it came in were in the sink and on the floor. The cat's collar was in the garbage. Cian kept trying to play the victim, but the cops didn't buy it. She got arrested and my sister pressed charges for theft and assault. Cian also got nabbed for possession of stolen goods. Cops found a bunch of DVD players and CD players still sitting in their boxes, sitting on her coffee table and in the spare room next to her bedroom. And she had a bunch of prescription drug bottles with other people's names on it on her kitchen counter. Turns out she'd also been stealing neighbours' painkillers when she'd visited them. And since she was a renter, the property owner gave her the boot for breach of contract. She went to jail and had to pay for the cat's vet bill. He was okay, but a bit traumatised and had a yellow patch on his butt, paw and tail for several months. Cian's hand got infected from the cat bite and it turned out it had also caused tendon and nerve damage as well. Moral of the story, stay out of people's houses and have the common sense to not mess with a cat named Lucifer. Yeah, I had 2 Siamese cats when I was younger and they could be brutal. I'm quite allergic to cats, so I mainly focused on the allergies of it, but they could be brutal at times, I do remember that. This next post is by Layla Arnis. I wanted my father to understand I wasn't coming. This is my first time posting, sorry for the formatting. My parents divorced when I was in the 1st grade. Not only did my dad disappear like Houdini, he stole my mother's ATM card to her personal account and drained her dry. My mother, being the saint she is, didn't even bat an eye. She still was cordial to him and never said a negative word about him. To me, my dad, albeit abandoning us, was still my hero. From 5th through 1st grade, I had the usual abandoned by dad stories. Maybe 1 or 2 visits in a year and 50 times of me waiting by the front window with my suitcase packed to go to his house and him never showing up. My mum through all of this was supportive and never said an ill word about him, so he still stayed my hero. When I was in 6th grade, my mother finally remarried and my father, who only had a picture of me at 8 months old in his wallet, went ballistic. Did I mention he never paid child support? He would use his father's social, they had the same name, to get away with it. After my mum remarried, he let it be known that I was now my stepdad's responsibility. He cut off communication with me until I graduated high school. He didn't attend my graduation or send me a card. What he did do was write me an email thanking God he no longer had to pay child support. He didn't anyway. What really broke me was his ruthless and brutal attack on my mother, attacking her weight, looks, teeth, and blaming any perceived negative traits that I had on her. For the first time, I realized what a cowardly piece of ass he was. I responded in kind. He told me I was no child of his, and that I was a waste. After that, I vowed that I would hurt him. 10 years later, my father, not interested in my wedding or my son, reached out to me. You see, he's a diabetic, and one of his organs were failing and he didn't have long. He's too far down the list and he needed someone in our family to donate. NuclearRevenge activated. I answered his email. I met up with him and pretended that I didn't hate his guts. I went and got tested to see if I was a match. I was. Did the therapy and met with doctors and his therapist. We scheduled the surgery. The day of the surgery, we meet at the hospital. I smiled in his face and let him know that I wouldn't be going through with the surgery. I watched the confusion line in his face. I just wanted you to know that you're no father to me and you're a waste. I left the hospital and drove home. My mum was pretty annoyed with me that I took it that far. My father is dying and I will be attending the funeral out of spite. And I will let everyone know what a POS he was. Edit. This really blew up. For those questioning my actions, I will give further detail. My father was/is semi-obsessed with my mother. His attachment to us was only in his perceived ability to get back with my mother. In the beginning, he would call and make plans to see us and just not show up. My mum would have to make up excuses. He has been married over 4 times and supports and loves his stepkids without a thought to us. Once my mother remarried, he was done with us. He kept in contact with my mother through email but had no interest in talking to his children. I have reached out before to invite him to my graduation, to let him know of my marriage and that he was a grandfather. All I got back was pictures of his new wife's kids. Upon getting to know him after agreeing to donate, I went to one of his therapy sessions at his request. There I heard the story of the true reason he contacted me. I listened as he lamented about his impending death, how he was resigned to his fate, only to have his new wife remind him of his former kids and maybe one of them will donate. He got excited because he had forgotten all about us, and it was like hope renewed. Do you know how essy it is to listen to the person who is responsible for your very existence talk about forgetting yours? Like I was a pair of sturdy old boots that gathered dust in the back of the hall closet, now rediscovered. I was born to be worn, to go shovel S. I knew then I wasn't going to give him anything. Wow. I don't even think I have a response to that story, it's just wow. That one hit hard. For sure. This next post is by Atlas Black. They framed me, they fired me, and that's how they effed themselves into a divorce, a prison sentence, and a handful of deportations. This one is a long one, but if you stick with it until the end, you will learn how I was framed and fired from my job, and accidentally set off a chain reaction that led to a staff overhaul with several managers being fired or moved to other restaurants, the general manager being fired and getting a divorce, and one of the managers being investigated by the FBI and ultimately arrested, as well as several of the workers being deported. Here we go. I used to work at an upscale restaurant owned by a large corporate entity that owns several different restaurant brands. I worked there for about 3.5 years before they eventually fired me, but more about that later. First, I want to give an idea of my role there. My role at that job was a little bit of everything. Since the day I started working there, I took it upon myself to learn as much as possible. I was very persistent with management when I wanted to learn a new department. I had started as a server, but eventually had worked my way into different departments and job titles like carryout, hosting, bartending, bar backing, banquets, catering, and deliveries. My singular goal while working there was to make myself available for as many hours as possible. I was being paid about $12 an hour, though that fluctuated if I was working as a bartender or server and making tips. Eventually it was noticed by management how I fit best into one of the non-tipped positions. I was so good at it that they decided to try me out as an unofficial supervisor over the team that worked in carryout, catering, and deliveries, as those were all one department. I knew this was going to ultimately mean a few less hours since I would only be working one department, so I negotiated with management to increase my pay by about $1.50. Since I was taking on additional responsibilities, they were satisfied with the pay increase. I wasn't trying to get as much money as possible, I just wanted to be able to pay my bills and still have a little money left over for fun. I was living in the highly taxed city of Chicago, which is in the already highly taxed state of Illinois, so it was pretty difficult to make ends meet and still have money left to enjoy my life. I'm a person of simple pleasures and I can enjoy things for long periods of time, so it didn't take much money to be happy. A video game could hold my attention for several months, sometimes even years. I had a family pet that I had brought with me to Chicago, so that was counted as an extra expense. Not long after I started this position as the unofficial supervisor, I got a girlfriend, so I was also going out more often and spending money on her. With my position and some smart budgeting, I was able to afford all of this. The money wasn't an issue, but management had a high turnover rate, so the incoming managers often did not know what the department entailed or how important hours were to workers of these departments. Eventually, it was noted that our current general manager was going to be fired and replaced. The incoming general manager was supposed to be some rock star when it came to improving restaurants. We looked up his name and found him as the first result on Google, but the entry wasn't some glowing review of his work ethic or of his impeccable ability to improve the way a restaurant runs. It was actually a mugshot and a police report filed for repeated domestic abuse. This is important later, we'll call him Harvey. Shortly after Harvey came in and started making changes, one of our best managers gave her resignation. She refused to work with him, and like an effing oracle, told us to expect lots of sexual harassment, misogynistic comments, and for him to eventually run this place into the ground. Not long after she left, our general manager began replacing our current managers with hand-picked people that he had worked with in the past. Eventually, all but one manager was replaced. The manager was the kitchen manager. We will call him Fredo. Fredo had been there since I started working there. He seemed to be something of a chameleon, as in his values and ethics seemed to change depending on who his boss was. Honestly, I sort of applaud his survival instincts, but ultimately see him as a suck-up and traitor. Harvey never really replaced the manager for our department, so he ran without a lot of oversight. Unless you count me as a supervisor, we didn't constantly have someone breathing down our necks about how things should be done. Our department had some hiccups here and there, but it still ran really smoothly. Since we did not have our own manager, we often had to radio from manager to come help us out on things that we needed a manager card for approval. Fredo would always be the one to answer these calls since the kitchen was closest to our department. Over time, the new team of managers started to see Fredo as the manager of our department as well. However, the hourly team that worked there still saw me as their supervisor. This meant that any time Fredo was trying to make changes, that would ultimately hurt us. The team relied on me to mitigate those disasters or to negotiate with Fredo to let us do our jobs the way we had already proven worked really well. Over several months, Fredo and I would butt heads dozens of times. He and I were constantly arguing about how important hours were to the workers in this department. He had it in his head that we should be living off tips like servers, but since most of our orders were carry-out, they came in through Grubhub, and Grubhub doesn't tip. We didn't have a lot of deliveries in a day, and the tips we got from those were maybe $10 if we were lucky, but splitting $10 4 ways doesn't add up to a lot. It just showed that Fredo had no clue what he was talking about. Eventually we had a meeting with our Harvey, Fredo, and all the workers of this department. It was marketed as a chance to voice all our grievances and concerns with the changes they wanted to make with no chance of retaliation. So the workers did exactly that. They talked about how Fredo was trying to cut hours even though he isn't our actual manager. When it was brought up that they were attempting to hire someone to be the manager, the team suggested that I take over, since I had already been supervising them and running things smoothly for the last several months. I was also the one that management consulted with when writing schedules, as I had an understanding of the days some workers could and couldn't work depending on their school schedules or family life. I could see it at the moment it was suggested that Harvey and Fredo made the decision on the spot that I had to be gotten rid of. Although they didn't say it, I could see the look they gave each other, and instinctively knew that my days at this place were numbered and my job was either going to be getting the axe one way or another. They made a bunch of promises to us about not cutting hours. They told us that they would stop sending all but one person home early and only leaving one person to clean everything and close up by themselves. As this wasn't a small department and it was simply too much for one person to do alone, while still meeting health and safety standards. They promised that whatever hours we were scheduled for, we would work. We weren't trying to be unreasonable, so we told them that we usually have 3 or 4 people scheduled to work our department. They could cut 2 of them early, but we always needed at least 2 people here to help close properly. The promise was made that they would always have at least 2 closers. However, only about a week later, they started sending all but 1 person home early again every night. One night, they tried to do it while I was scheduled as the closer, and we had just returned from a massive catering event and there was an unbelievable amount of cleanup left to do for 1 person. When Fredo came in and tried to send everyone except me home, I stepped up and told him that he was consistently breaking the promise he had made to us during the meeting. He looked me square in the face and told me to stop complaining about it, and if I was going to keep up trying to talk to him about him breaking his promises, he could easily find someone who could work my shifts. I quickly realized that this was an assassination attempt on my job. He wanted me to press it further, so I backed off and started cleaning. I ended up having to stay way late, and that meant overtime pay anyway. I got a write-up for that, since we weren't allowed to work overtime without a manager's approval. When I refused to sign the write-up, pointing out that I had tried to explain to Fredo that I wouldn't be able to clean up all that stuff alone before my scheduled shift ended, I was allowed to leave without signing the write-up, but only because the HR rep that was present at the time wasn't one of Harvey's cronies. Skip ahead to the day I got fired. It is important to note at this point that I always came into work an hour early. Since we lived in Chicago, food was expensive. However, at our job, we were allowed to have as much free soup and bread as we liked. So I would come into work 1 hour early every day so I could have some soup and bread for lunch before my shift. But on this day, when I walked into the kitchen to get myself some soup, one of the line cooks told me that he had a dish that had been cancelled after he cooked it, and Fredo had told him to give it to someone. He assured me Fredo had already comped it and that it was free to take for whoever wanted it. It just so happened to be my favourite appetizer, so I happily took the free food. Not long after I got to my booth, both Harvey and Fredo approached me and asked if I had put in a ticket for that food. I told them that the line cook had given it to me and said it was the cancelled order that Fredo had already comped. Fredo looked dumbfounded and said he had no idea what I was talking about, so Harvey told me, "I think you know that's theft. Go ahead and finish the food and then grab my stuff and go. That's the last meal you'll be having here." I tried to explain to them that I had been given this food by the line cook, but they refused to listen, so I offered to take them to the kitchen to clear this up with the cook. But by the time I had already gone back up to the kitchen with them to talk to the line cook, he had already gone home for the day. I had no choice but to gather up my stuff, say my goodbyes and head home. On the way out, I told my people working my department that afternoon what had happened, exactly as it happened. They were shocked and angry, but mostly sad to see me go. I decided on my way out, I would stop by the accounting office and pick up any tips that may have been dropped for me that week, just to make sure I didn't get screwed out of that money. Before heading down, I had the gut feeling to just set my phone to record, and I stuffed it in my pocket with the camera rolling. Although the video was entirely black since it was in my pocket, I did manage to get a pretty muffled recording of Harvey and Fredo's voice through the door, discussing how things had gone as planned and that they had been trying to get rid of me ever since the meeting with my department. I knocked on the door and they hushed up before opening it. They asked what I was still doing here, and I asked for my tips. They gathered what was in the safe for me and handed it over. Despite my anger rising at what I had just heard, I decided not to burn this bridge just yet, because perhaps I could effing nuke it later. I offered a handshake to both managers, thanked them for the opportunity to work there, and I left, making sure to pull my phone out of my pocket and record the front of the restaurant with the sign showing its name and logo. Working in a restaurant, you learn to always cover your own A. It's true for most jobs, but something was just telling me I would need this all later. If I was being accused of theft, I wanted to be able to prove it wasn't true if it ever came up in future job interviews, which is exactly what happened and where this all started going nuclear. On the train ride home, I sent some messages and made some posts on some local groups on Facebook, saying that I had just been fired and that I was looking for a job as quickly as possible. By the time I had gotten off at my stop, I had already set up an interview for later that day. I was offered the job about 5 minutes into the interview, but after going over the details, It didn't sound like it was for me, so I turned it down. I interviewed a few other places and found one that was a damn good fit, with the hefty pay increase compared to my previous job, and I wouldn't have to deal with customers. It was an auditing job for a logistics company. However, during the interview with the manager of this job, he mentioned he had already called my previous place of employment and spoken with the general manager, Harvey. Harvey had told him that I had been fired for theft. Luckily for me, the manager I was interviewing with asked me to tell him more about that, and he was willing to let me pull out my phone and find the recording. I asked if the voice in the video was the same one he had spoken on the phone with. It was. That was confirmation enough for him that I hadn't made a fake video. He listened to the two managers in the video admit that they had set me up, and watched to the end when I showed the front of the restaurant complete with its logo and name. The manager interviewing me, who we'll start calling Dean, hired me immediately and asked me to send him the recording, so I did. I thought that was the end of it. About 7 months later, after settling into this job quite nicely, HR sent out a welcome all our new team members email, which listed all the newest hires, some facts about them, and had pictures of them all. They sent these out every time they hired a new round of people. One of them, Thomas, was a former co-worker who worked with me at the restaurant. We had worked at the host stand together, so I was pretty glad to see someone I knew and liked coming onto the team. I sought out his desk and went and said hello, and asked why he left the restaurant. He hadn't left willingly. He had been laid off because the company was under investigation. It had started as a relatively small matter. The corporate entity that owned the restaurant chain had received an email with an attached video, my video, that had been filmed from inside my pocket. This was cause enough for corporate to send someone to investigate internally. Thomas was pretty surprised that I hadn't heard anything about it, since there had been numerous attempts to get in touch with me. As soon as he said that, I logged into the old email I had used when I first applied for the job at the restaurant. I had at least 24 emails asking me to come in and discuss my employment and termination. I never replied, I just didn't care enough anymore. I also changed my number since then, so they hadn't been able to contact me by phone. Thomas continued explaining that before corporate had sent someone, Harvey and Fredo had talked with my department and tried to offer them all a small pay increase to spin a corporate story about how I was incompetent at my job and failed to live up to my duties. The day the corporate auditor showed up, there had been a small exodus of people from my old department. They quit on the spot in front of the lady from corporate, let's call her Audrey, and made sure to rat out Harvey and Fredo before leaving. Strike 1 for both of them. Strike 2 came a couple days after Audrey showed Harvey and Fredo the recording that had kicked all of this off. They denied it vehemently, but there was no mistaking Harvey's voice. It's unique. Not only that, but the video also picked up their voice and mine when we shook hands and had a friendly parting of the ways, which was something they had already bragged about to Audrey, thinking it made them look better that we were able to part on good terms. This wasn't the actual strike 2. That came when it was clear they needed to be separated, so Audrey sent Fredo to work at another restaurant owned by our parent company and temporarily demoted Harvey to manager. This tore them apart. They had been once an inseparable, evil team, but the pressure of the investigation must have pushed them over the edge. They ended up at each other's throats on Facebook on a public post on the company page. The post had since been deleted, but Thomas explained it as the following. Fredo had been pictured in the Facebook post on the restaurant page, and Harvey made a passive-aggressive comment about how Fredo shouldn't even be in the picture, since he had been moved to another restaurant due to misconduct. Fredo saw this comment, and said something along the lines of, "At least when people Google my name, I don't show up as the guy who punched his wife." To which Harvey responded, "Very funny from the guy who is cheating on his wife with Janet's sister." Not her real name, but Janet was the girl they appointed to officially supervise my old department after they fired me, the unofficial supervisor. Fredo replies to that by saying, "Like you haven't tried with half the waitresses, they all have stories about you trying to F them." The post was deleted, but not before it had been seen by Audrey the auditor. That was officially strike 2. Strike 3 came when Audrey started interviewing the female waitstaff and bartenders, seeing if any of them could confirm that Harvey had tried to make a move on them. All of them were interviewed separately. Several of them had similar stories. Every girl that confirmed Harvey had made a move on them all said he had offered to be their sugar daddy if he would send ends or stay after closing to fool around with them. Harvey was fired, but that wasn't the worst of it. Audrey the auditor wasn't just some random woman from corporate, she was the old regional manager for this area and had personally hired Harvey's wife as the general manager of another restaurant in the city. So she called up the restaurant Harvey's wife worked at and told Harvey's wife everything she had learned from the female waitstaff. We learned later that they had gotten a divorce over him trying to cheat on her after she'd already given him a second chance to change after he had beat her. I don't know what compelled her to give him a second chance after something like that, but she sure didn't give him a third. After firing Harvey, the line cook who had given me the food was interviewed by Audrey. I don't know how it came up, but at some point he had let it slip that he was an illegal immigrant. She had his file in her hand with an Illinois ID and social security number on file, so this confused her and she pressed him for more information. It turns out that Fredo had made some connections and had his own miniature black market going on where he would have fake social security cards and IDs made for the illegal immigrants he was hiring at reduced wages. It had been going on for at least 4 years. Needless to say, this is a felony. With the potential PR nightmare that she was likely dealing with, she felt she had no other choice but to alert the authorities. Local PD enlisted the help of the FBI since some of the evidence led them beyond the jurisdiction of the local police. Fredo was arrested and quickly gave up the names of the people working that he had sold social security cards and IDs to. I'm not sure if he gave up all of them, but he did name drop about 14 people, and of those 14, at least half were deported by the time Thomas had been let go. One of them was the line cook that had given me the food the day I was fired. Thomas went on to explain that it had all started with me being fired, but I never sent that recording to corporate. I'd only sent it to Dean when he hired me. I asked him about it, and he told me he had sent it to his wife, since she was a lawyer. He wanted to see if I had a case to maybe sue my old job since what they had done was wrong. But he also remembered that when we had first talked about it, I had said I'm not the type of person who would try to make millions off an entire company because of the mistake of 2 a-holes. But I also said that it would be pretty sweet to see them lose their jobs too. So his wife had been the one who sent it to the legal team at the corporate HQ of my old restaurant job. My boss showed it to his wife, who forwarded it to the real head honchos of my old job. They were both just trying to get 2 scumbags fired for what they did to me, but ended up pulling a thread so long that it didn't end until there were actual harassment accusations, revelations about managers cheating on their wives with girls related to people that had placed in positions of authority, a divorce, massive layoffs pending investigations, a staff overhaul, an FBI investigation into what could be considered black market dealings of falsified government-issued documents, and at least a half a dozen deportations and probably as many as 14. I don't know if this counts as nuclear revenge, as I didn't actively pursue it. But Thomas ended up showing me that even if it wasn't revenge, it was definitely nuclear, and the crater it had left was massive. Wow, that was a long one. And with that, I think that's going to be it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the stories in r/NuclearRevenge. Let me know what you'd like to listen to next in the comment section below, and also hit that subscribe button because I post new Reddit content every single day. This was Reload Reacts, and I will see you in the next video.